Powered by the Montana Television Network. The KRTV 530 News starts right now in high definition.
Thanks for trusting KRTV as your choice for news. I'm Tim McGonigal.
And I'm Shannon Newth. We continue to follow a 19-year-old murder case out of Fort Benton.
MTN's Joe Huizinga has been in the courtroom for the trial of Thomas Jaraczeski in the death of Brian Ryan back in 1996. And he joins us now live with more on today's proceedings. Joe?
Tim and Shannon, Jaraczeski's defense rested their case at about 11 o'clock this morning after hearing from two witnesses from the Montana State Crime Lab that were used to drive home the lack of physical evidence placing Jaraczeski at the crime scene. When closing arguments began, the prosecution reviewed Jaraczeski's breakup with Ann Wishman and what they called the stalking and spying in the weeks leading up to Ryan's death. They also argued that phone calls made by Jaraczeski on Friday, July 12th, were used to find out that Ryan was home and alone. That was the last anyone ever heard from him. They say that the fact that Ryan was shot 3 times with his own gun proves that his death not an accident and was well planned. They argued that even though the evidence is circumstantial, there's enough to find Jaraczeski guilty. The defense began by telling jurors the case will remain unsolved, attacking how the investigation was conducted with the crime scene being cleaned up prematurely and indicating that investigators had ignored possibilities that didn't match their case against Jaraczeski. They argued that hang-up calls made Friday night were not significant because Jaraczeski had a pattern of making hang-up calls to Ryan and Wishman. They also questioned the state's timeline, citing witnesses that saw Ryan Friday night and saying his body would have been more decomposed had he died on Friday. They also argued that investigators had ignored other suspects in the case, including Ann Wishman and Ryan's friend, Larry Higginbush. Finally, they said that there was no way the jury could find beyond a reasonable doubt that Jaraczeski was guilty. Now, the case will go to the jurors tomorrow morning for them to begin their deliberations. In Fort Benton, Joe Huizinga, MTN News.
All right, thanks a lot, Joe. Pope Francis has arrived in Washington, D.C., and at this time, several members from the Catholic Diocese of Great Falls-Billings have made their way to Philadelphia in anticipation of seeing the Pope later this week.
MTN's Julianne DeLorso has more.
It's about 2,000 miles from Great Falls to Philadelphia, but that's less than half the distance it is to Vatican City, where the Pope has traveled from to be in the United States. Carol Lee Christensen, Don Clutter Collins, and Cooper Collins from Great Falls are all making the trek across the country to see him.
There's no words. There's no words. It's too big.
I'm really excited because a lot of people my age don't get to see the Pope. I've only seen like pictures or him on TV.
Who doesn't have the Pope on their bucket list?
They'll be among about 35 people traveling with the Diocese of Great Falls and Billings, but among 2 million that are expected to attend the papal mass.
It's nice that we as a diocese, can offer this opportunity for families to travel together and not just be completely on their own and how do we find the Pope in 2 million people?
Also making the trip, Bishop Michael Warfel. The bishop, who met the pontiff on a trip to Vatican City last October, will meet up with the diocese in Philly after greeting the Pope in Washington, D.C. There, the bishop expects the Pope to address several topics like ecology, climate change, and the refugee crisis.
Oh, I think he's great. I think he's just great. And he is bringing a very prophetic message to the world.
Meanwhile, Carol Lee, Cooper, and Don are just looking forward to spending some quality time together in the city of brotherly love with the Pope.
I think it's an exciting time for the United States to have him on our soil. And for me in particular, being able to share this experience with my mom and my son, I feel very blessed and grateful.
Would I like to get up close and personal? Yes, me and 2 million others. You know, just to be in his presence, just to hear his voice, to participate in a papal mass, to hear his message, that's, you know, that's the memory of a lifetime.
In Great Falls, Julianne DeLorso, MTN News.
Conservationists and industry groups are cheering a federal decision on the greater sage grouse.
MTN's Sanjay Telwani reports on today's actions by the Department of the Interior and what it means for Montana.
The decision's been anticipated for years. The greater sage grouse will not be listed for protection under the Endangered Species Act. That keeps management of the bird largely in the hands of the states. That's good news for oil drillers, bird watchers, and hunters.
Because the sage grouse is an important game animal. It's also important because, and this is one of the unique things about the sage grouse, the sagebrush habitat that it depends on supports hundreds of other species.
Governor Steve Bullock established a sage grouse advisory council in 2013. It's worked on rules to protect the bird and its habitat, 60% of which is on private land, without major restrictions on grazing, drilling, and construction. The Montana Petroleum and Stock Growers Associations praised the move, so did conservation groups.
Today's decision demonstrates that when all the diverse interests that have a stake in sage grouse management work together, we can find ways to balance the many traditional uses of our landscape in eastern Montana, farming, ranching, economic activities.
But industry groups and Montana Republican leaders warned that restrictions on federal lands remain and are stricter than the state's rules.
I remain concerned that the Obama administration's land use plans will have a harmful impact on Montana's economy, our land users, and our Montana way of life. Montana needs to continue to take the lead on